First, we have unique element, which is 7, 10, 3, 2, 4, and 9, and the frequency that appeared is 2, 5, 6, 4, 1, 2. So we build them into a hash map. The key is the unique, and the frequent is our value. So the leftmost element is 7, and the rightmost element is 9, and we have to random pick a pivot index. Let's say we pick 2, and then we have to swap the pivot with the rightmost element 9, which is 2 become 9 and 9 become 2. So this is how we move the pivot at the end. So after 2 become 9 and 9 become 2, let's set a new variable, which is store index. Let's assign by the leftmost index, which is start from 0, and then let's create a new pointer, which is also start from 0, the pointer I, and then we compare the counter at unique at I, which is the frequency of the 7, which is 2, which is less than the pivot at peak frequency, which is 4. So we have to swap the value of the element at the store index and the element at the I, which is the pointing the index 0 element, which is 7. So the 7 swap with itself, it still won't change anything. After we swap the element, we have to increment the store index by 1, and whether do we have swap element or not, at each step we have to increment the pointer I by 1, and then we compare the counter at 10, which is the frequency of 10, which is 5, which is greater than the pivot frequency, which is 4. So we don't have to do anything, we just keep the same. Because this time we didn't swap the element, so the store index is still remain in the same place, which is the index 1, but we have to increment I from 1 to 2, and then we compare the counter at 3, which is the frequency of 3, which is 6, which is greater than 4, which is the pivot frequency. So we don't have to do anything, we just move on and keep the same. Because we didn't swap any element, so we have to remain the store index in the same place, which is index is 1, and then we have to increment I from 2 to 3. And now let's compare the counter as 9, which is the frequency of 9, which is 2, which is less than 4, which is the pivot frequency. So we have to swap the element with unique at store index and unique at I. So now 9 become 10 and 10 become 9. Because we just swapped the element, so we have to increment the store index from index 1 to index 2, and then we incremented I from the index 3 to index 4, and we compare the counter at 4, which have 1 frequency, which is less than the frequency 4, which is the pivot frequency. So we have to swap the element as unique at I and unique at store index. Now the element 4 become element 3 and 3 become 4 because we just swapped the elements. We have to increment the store index from the index 2 to index 3, and then we have to increment the pointer I. But we can't increment because the pointer I must less than the rightmost index. So before we finish, we have to swap the rightmost element with the unique at store index so that we can put back our pivot element to the original place or to the correct place. So now the 10 become 2 and 2 become 10. So now this array, this hash map is already partitioned. So our pivot element is 2 and its frequency is 4. We should divide our array into 2 parts. The left part is less frequent than the pivot frequency, and the right part is more frequent than the pivot frequency.